Before we start this video, a large thank you to Aaron, Dev, HF, Ghostboy, and Brandon for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. As always, an immense thank you to Halo Burner for their continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. I hope you enjoy the video, my friend. It is sincerely appreciated. Hello everybody, today we're going to conclude our spell system, so I went ahead and edited the spell effects here. You can see it looks a bit more pretty. Right now we throw it, though nothing really happens, it just contacts the ground and kind of hangs out there. So we're going to first make it so it will contact and explode. Let's make a couple new scripts. The first one we're going to make is going to be called the Fireball Manager. Now, like all other things, I like giving each individual thing its own manager if I can. So we're also going to make a Damage Collider script too. You could call this spell Damage Collider if you want to have a base class for these kinds of spells, but not all spells are going to behave exactly the same, especially if you get into different kinds of projectiles. So you could just have like a general base class for the collision and stuff, but for now I will just make a script called Fireball Damage Collider. So let's start by opening up the Fireball Manager. That's what we're going to work in first. And let's make a few things. Let's first outline what this script is going to do just so we're clear on what its purpose is. I'm going to delete the start and update functionality, drop in my namespace as is per tradition. Okay, so we have this. Now what's the purpose? What does the script do? The script serves as a central hub to manipulate and adjust the Fireball spell once it's active, doing things such as making the spell slightly curve or follow its lock on target, so tracking, gentle tracking, like a lot of spells have. Assigning damage neatly within a function from the script, and 3, enabling or disabling VFX and sound effects such as contact, explosions, trails, etc. Alright, so let's just get to work on making these, and I'm going to make a header first. I'm going to call this Colliders, and there's only one collider in the spell. It's just going to be the primary damage collider, but maybe you have some spells that have multiple. That's a thing too. So we'll make a public Fireball Damage Collider variable, and actually I'm going to make that a serializable field. It does not need to be public at this point in time. Alright, what's next? Right below that, let's make another header. I'm going to call this Spell Target. And this is the target. If you're locked on this when you throw the spell, it's going to have tracking. Very subtle tracking most of the time. Some spells might have greater tracking. But you want it to gently curve into the target. So let's make a public character manager variable. Call that Spell Target. And again, it doesn't need to be public actually to make it a serializable field for now. Alright, right below that, let's make another header. I'm going to call this VFX. And this is going to be the stuff that will spawn when the projectile explodes, or maybe you have trail effects that you want to enable or disable after a certain time. It's any kind of effects. So I'm going to make a serializable field for a game object and impact particle. So we're just going to make it so there's an impact particle, and later on in this video, impact particle fully charged. So the particles that it spawns when this explodes, the particles that spawn when this explodes if the spell was fully charged before throwing it. Alright, let's make a private bool, has collided, initialize it at false by default, optional. If you're going to have a lot of things that share, you're going to make a base class for this, let's do that. So I'm going to make a base class for spell projectile, or sorry, spell manager, because a lot of my spells will have an impact particle, and they will have a spell target. So for that reason, I will make a base class. Think of this in relation to our player manager script and our character manager script. So we have our Fireball Manager and then our general spell manager. You don't need to do this at all. I just find it does help things when you have shared variables. So in my case here, there's almost always going to be the potential of a spell target and an impact particle. There won't always necessarily be a damage collider because some spells might be healing you, but impact particle could still be used there when the spell has been fully cast or if it contacts something. Like I said, you don't need to do this. If there is shared data though, it does help. Alright, let's jump back over to the spell manager and let's add in virtual void start, awake, and update functionality just in case we ever want to use that in the future. We're going to use a couple of these things right away, and you want to make sure you write them as protected virtual voids in case you want some logic to be shared across everything that inherits from this spell manager base class, because then you just call base dot the function name. So awake, for example, would be base dot awake. So we did override update, we can call base update and get the update logic on the base class and this class. So we're going to say if the spell target does not equal null, we're just going to do a simple transform.lookat and pass the spell target.transform. Cool, easy enough. Now, we want to make a variable for the spell's rigid body if it has one. We know the Fireball does, so let's make a private rigid body. Let's call this Fireball rigid body. And we can get that on awake. And again, if you're going to have any special logic on awake, just call base.awake if you want to get the base class's logic as well. Fireball rigid body is equal to get component rigid body because it sits in the same game object as this script, if you're making it like me. So we're going to check to see if the spell target is not equal null, then we're going to look at it. Cool. Now, if the fireball rigid body does not equal null, we're going to take the velocity from the rigid body currently by saying vector3 current velocity. We're going to equal that to the fireball rigid body dot velocity. We're going to edit the velocity a little bit by saying fireball rigid velocity dot velocity is equal to transform dot forward plus the current velocity. Now that should gently guide it into the direction of the target while it's moving. So if your lock on target is moving around a little bit, just gently guide the projectile into their position so you don't have to basically compensate for where they're moving when you aim it. Now, let's add an on collision enter, not an on trigger enter. What we're going to do here now is check for the collision game object layer equaling 6, which is our character layer. So if this does hit the character layer, ignore it. I know we set up the collision matrix, but just as a failsafe, if it does hit the character layer, just simply ignore it. Now, we're going to say if we have not collided, we want to say has collided equals true. And then we're just going to simply instantiate some explosion or contact effects. So I'm going to say instantiate spell destruction effects. And this doesn't exist yet, so we're going to make it momentarily. Right below the private void on collision enter, let's make a private void. And again, I'll just call that instantiate spell destruction effects. Now, later on in the video, we're going to basically instantiate it based on if we're fully charging the spell, but let's get it working first. Let's just make sure this is going to actually do what it's supposed to be doing. So I'm going to make a new header here for instantiation or instantiated effects. I'm going to make a private game object instantiated destruction effects. This is just in case you want to keep it as a local variable for whatever reason. Sometimes you do. So we're going to say instantiated destruction effects is equal to instantiate, and we're going to instantiate the spell destruction effects. Is that what I called it? What did I call that? I called it the impact particle. There we go. All right, cool. So now we have an impact particle. We want to instantiate that at the transform.position of this. And we want to say quaternion.identity to reset its rotation if it has any. And then we're pretty much good to go. So you could do destroy and then pass your instantiated effects, which is why some people save it as a local variable, like so. But we're actually just going to use our utility script, so we don't need to call this, but I just wanted to show you that it's another option. It's good to do things multiple ways in case you have a preference. So now we're going to call destroy this game object after we have instantiated our destruction effects. So you can see here, boom, we got some destruction effects I quickly made just by editing my fireball effects. I'm going to add a utility script called destroy after a time onto this. There we go. And let's add the fireball manager script onto our spell fireball release. And let's drag in our impact particles that we just made. Now for the full charge one, I'm just going to keep the regular one there right now so nothing changes. You can see here now if I throw the fireball, boom, it hits the wall and it does indeed explode. Now if I throw at this character, it should go right through him. Let's just make sure. Okay, that went over his head. So let me lock on and try that again. Let's back up a little bit and throw. Yes, it does. Okay, cool. So we want that. We don't want the velocity, or rather the rigid body with the collision to contact the character. We only want the damage collider to do that. So now let's go to our release prefab and make a new game object under that called the spell damage collider. And now I'm going to add the fireball damage collider to that. And I'm also going to add a rigid body. This is very important. So we're going to give this its own layer. Make sure it does not use gravity and it is kinematic. And then assign the layer to a damage collider. And then add a sphere collider, set it to a trigger, and make it a little bit smaller than your sphere collider that carries the projectile and moves it with physics. Now, why am I giving it a rigid body here? Because you want these colliders to act independently of one another and not as a shared collider. So when we give each collider as a child its own rigid body, it does that. If I am mistaken in my understanding of that, someone in the comments please correct me, but that is how I understand it to be so. Now, fireball damage collider, we can make this derive from the spell damage collider or spell projectile damage collider, which we don't have made yet. I am going to make this as a base class because they do share one thing in common for sure, and that is the spellcaster variable. Think of that as like the character causing damage on a melee weapon damage collider. It's the same thing, just going to set it up a little bit differently here. So if you want to just use that character causing damage variable in that nature, you can too. But in the future, you might have different spell interactions, and you might just want that as a variable. It all depends on how you set it up. I'm just doing it because it's preference, quite honestly. If you find it doesn't make sense to you, then just do it another way. So I am going to make a public character manager variable here and call this spellcaster. All right, cool. Let's go over here now on the Unity project, and let's look up the melee weapon damage collider, because we're going to steal some logic here from it, but we're going to edit it. We're going to steal the damage target, the get blocking dot values, check for parry, and right up to on trigger enter. We're stealing it all. Go back to the fireball damage collider, and then paste that in there. Now get rid of everything that looks for an attack modifier. We don't need that right now. And change character causing damage to our newly created spellcaster. You're going to see that a bunch. So character causing damage, become spellcaster. Character causing damage, become a spellcaster. And thankfully, because of how we set this up before, like, we can just reuse these server RPCs. They're identical in nature. This is great. That's what's having the benefit of having your damage collider set up to all kind of act very similar and work within each other's context. So this is nice. Now you can't parry a spell as of yet, so we're just going to delete all this. Certain objects in the future can definitely parry spells, but right now, no. So the dot values, blocking will work the same, but we should be checking for the projectile's position, not the character's position. Hi, Seb from the future here. I forgot to change that. So when you want to check your block values, don't check for the position of the attacker, check for the position of the fireball itself, so this game object. Okay, so up top, let's go to override awake. And what we want to do is make a variable here, private fireball manager. And we're going to get the fireball manager on awake by saying fireball manager equals get component in parent, because it sits on a game object that is a parent of this game object. Now, what do we want to do? We want to call that because when we actually contact a character, we want to destroy this game object. Now, some spells, like Lightning Spear, for example, it will destroy the game object a little bit later, and it will instantiate kind of multiple versions of the contact effects. Like, as the pieces of the Lightning Spear pass through you, it'll pop more, I believe. So for that very reason, I'm going to make two versions of this. One that will instantiate spell destruction effects, like so. But then we can also do it after a time. Now, you could also call destroy game object right here, but we don't need to do that because we're going to call destroy game object inside the instantiate spell destruction effects. So don't worry about that right now. But yeah, we're going to do the instantiate spell destruction effects, which just basically destroys it right away and spawns an impact particle. But let's make a public void wait, then instantiate spell destruction effects. So let's make a private IE numerator wait, and then instantiate effects. And what you want to do here now is also make a coroutine variable, and we're going to make it pass a float time to wait. Why are we making a coroutine variable? Well, we don't want this coroutine to run multiple times on accident or keep running it simultaneously a bunch. So for that reason, we're going to make a private coroutine, and we can call this destruction effects coroutine. And then when we go to start the coroutine, we're going to say if destruction effects coroutine does not equal null, we're going to simply say stop coroutine destruction effects coroutine. And then we're going to say destruction effects coroutine equals start coroutine. And then we can pass wait, then instantiate effects. And then we're going to pass our time to wait. All right, so let's make this actually require time to wait. And then we can pass time to wait in both of these. And why is this giving me grief? Oh, I see I'm not even calling the right function. I'm actually not calling the right thing at all in both of these cases. There we go. All right, so now all we do is yield return null. Yield return new wait for seconds and pass our time to wait, and then call the instantiate spell destruction effects. So if you wanted some cool interaction where you waited a bunch, and then throughout each second you wait, or each tenth of a second, you want to spawn a contact pop effect, it could look really cool. And after 2 or 3 pops, you could then destroy the main projectile. Just an idea. It's what you do with some spells. So having this little helper function is definitely useful for stuff like that. Now, call destroy game object at the end of the instantiate destruction effects. And then we're going to say fireball manager, wait, then instantiate destruction effects, and then you could pass the time. But for my sake, I'm just going to use the regular one. Make sure that the damage collider on your release effects has the damage collider layer. Forgot to do that, by the way. It's very important. So I'm going to go over here now and save that, instantiate spell destruction effects, and also make sure you tick. This is kinematic. That's very important. Make sure that is ticked. I forgot to, even though I said it. All right, let's go back to the script now. And what we're going to do right on awake, we're just going to say damage collider is equal to get component in children. And now you could do this like so, but what I'm going to do instead is just actually drag it in the prefab, just because. All right, I'm going to save that. Now let's go back over to the fireball manager, public void. I'm going to call this initialize fireball. And I'm going to make this require a character manager, call that spellcaster. And then I'm just going to simply say spellcaster, as in the spellcaster on this script, damage_collider.spellcaster, sorry, is equal to the spellcaster. All right, cool. That is good. Next, we're going to say damage_collider.fire damage. We'll just say 150 for now. We'll make some cool formula in the future. We'll go over formulas for spells and how to do it. So I'll make a to-do here. Set up damage formula to calculate spell damage. This is going to be based on your character stats, the initial spell power of the spell, and then the initial spell buff of the catalyst you are using. It's kind of a weird formula. I will show you the Elden Ring way and then show you a generic way to do it. The Elden Ring way is pretty cool, but it is just kind of complex for whatever reason. I feel like it could be a lot simpler, but I'm sure they did it for a reason in design philosophy. So let's go over to the Fireball spell and then right down here. Now, I'm going to get a Fireball manager variable, call it Fireball manager, and I'm going to get that by getting an instantiated release spell effects.get component Fireball manager. So we have this list of colliders here. We're going to get to that in a second. First, let's call Fireball.initialize Fireball and pass the player. All right, so back over here on the Fireball manager, I'm going to make this public for the damage collider, just to show you how to do this. Now, we actually don't need to do ignore physics with all these colliders because we have our collision matrix and our damage collider set up to do that for us. But I just want to show you how to do it because, one, it's an alternative way, and two, physics.ignore collision is a very useful helper function. So what you want to do is call physics.ignore collision after the Fireball manager here, and then you want to call it between the colliders we have. So we have the main character collider here, which is just referred to as our character collision collider, and then we want to call a Fireball manager.damage collider.damage collider. Now, it's not a public variable, so let's go make that public. If we go back to the damage collider base class, get the damage collider itself, and then call, or rather make that public. So what this will do is, even though if the collision matrix is set up for these colliders to not ignore each other, this will make them ignore each other. It has very niche use cases, but it's very, very helpful. So after we get the main collider, you can see we have an array of character colliders that we get from the character component children. We can set up those two, and for each of those, we're just going to go and do the same thing. Add a true at the end of this for, as in true, yes, it will ignore. If you change that to false, it means they won't ignore each other, which can kind of reverse the process. So if you have two colliders that and the collision matrix should collide for some reason and you don't want them to, this is the function you can use. It is very niche, like I said, but very, very cool. Now, we don't actually need this because if we go over and check our Fireball damage collider, what we can see is that it actually already checks if the target is us, and if it is, we're just going to ignore it. But I just really wanted to show you that function because I'm sure some of you will get use out of that someday if you've never seen it. It is very handy, but for now I will actually comment this out. So right here, comment this out, and I can go up and comment at the local variables above too and just kind of paste them below. So I'm going to do that. We have the character colliders here, and I'll put these down here. All right, cool. So now we have all this set up. What's next? Let's save this now. Let's jump into the game. Let's make sure this is working. I'm going to throw a fireball. And then, boom, you can see, yep, we do have damage. Now, that fireball is hanging a little bit low. Thankfully, we can just go to our fireball spell and increase the upward velocity, like so. And then we can throw it again, and this should be more at his chest or head. So let's just give this another toss. And boom, yeah, it looks good. Cool. All right, working as intended so far. Let's keep moving. Let's do the full charge effects now. So copy your fireball release and your offhand release and make versions of both, but change it from release to full charge. And then you want to get the appropriate animations that you have. If you're using the ones I provided, there are some full charge release effects that have been provided with them. If you have your own, insert them now. And if you're not even doing spell full charge effects, then don't worry about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this now and drop in the proper animations. Now, you could just do a singular bool for full charge, and that would work. So we could say is charging spell. But the problem comes into if you're using the left and right hand, you don't want to fully charge the spell with the left hand button. If you're using the right hand, it would feel a bit weird. So for that reason, we're going to break it up into two, is charging left hand and is charging right hand. But for now, don't worry about it. Just let's go and make transitions. So we're going to say, if we are fully charging a spell, we want to make sure we have exit time. It's going to be 1 and 0 for exit time and transition duration if you're using my animations. And make sure we're passing a parameter for is charging spell has to be true. Otherwise, if it's false, what we're going to do is onTick has exit time and go back to the regular release animation, okay? So again, if you're going to the fully charged animation, has exit time is true, make sure you are charging a spell and that is set to true. If you're going to the regular release, make sure that you have no exit time, so the spell will fire way faster. And then you're going to make sure you're not charging the spell. Those are the conditions. Very simple, very straightforward. And then make transitions from your fully charged animation states back to your empty like you normally would do. And just set up the successfully charged spell. Let's go back to the spell base class now. Let's make a public virtual void successfully fully charged, or fully cast spell. You can say full charged. So successfully cast spell full charged. And this is going to do something pretty much identical, except we're going to edit a few things, like the instantiation effects and maybe some other parameters if you want. Go to the player or character combat manager now, whichever you have it on, and make one for successfully fully cast spell full charge. I keep saying successfully cast spell full charge. And then instead of calling successfully cast spell, call successfully cast spell full charge. So you can see here the logic is literally identical. We're just going through a different route now. Instead of casting the normal spell, we're casting the fully charged variant. Put your animation events on your offhand and your main hand. Don't forget to do that. And now come over to the fireball spell. Let's override successfully cast spell full charge. And let's copy everything we have inside the successfully cast spell, but we're going to make a couple alterations here. Don't go right up to the base, because you want to keep the base as its own function, not the one from successfully cast spell. You want it to be successfully cast spell full charge. Now, instead of instantiating the regular spellcast effects, let's go ahead now and make a variable for fully charged spell effects. So why would you want to do this? Well, what if you want to make the spell look more, large and intimidating, to give the players some feedback and response to show that, yep, you fully charged the spell. Look at how different it is. So let's do that. And then let's go ahead and go over now to the Fireball Manager, and let's make a public bool for is fully charged. And let's initialize that defaultly at false. Why are we doing this? Well, when we contact, we want to know if we should instantiate the full charged effects or the not full charged effects. So we're just going to do a simple check under instantiate spell destruction effects. If the spell is fully charged, we're going to instantiate the full charged impact particle. If not, we're going to do the regular impact particle. So there we go, impact particle, fully charged. Okay, jump back to the fireball spell script now. So next we're going to say is fully charged is true. And then we're going to go over to the initialize fireball. And then you can say if it's fully charged, you can modify the damage here further. I'm just going to make it an arbitrary number right now for no specific reason, just so we can see that it is in fact working. And now I'm going to change it. We'll say 1.4 just so the difference is very visible. Now I'm going to go over to the player network manager. What you want to do here now is make two network variables. I'm going to make a header for it called spells. Let's make one for is charging left hand and is charging right hand. So you can copy any network bool that we have here by default. I'm going to copy is two-handing weapon. I'm going to change this to is charging right spell. And then is charging left spell. And now we need to take a trip over to our input manager, and we need to set up inputs for this. Now you could use the left bumper input as it is, because we do already check for basically enabling and disabling it, but I'm going to give it its own thing. Also going to change this to is charging right spell, and the animator parameter is going to make another one for is charging left spell. And because I just changed that, go to your offhand spells and change the parameter from is charging right spell to is charging left spell, like so. So is charging right becomes is charging left. And the other one's already fine because we just changed the name of the parameter, and it will defaultly go to the newly changed is charging right spell. All right, let's go to player controls. Let's go to player actions. I'm just going to duplicate both the right bumper and the left bumper inputs here. And all I'm going to do is simply add a hold interaction on them. And I'm going to make it so they're called hold right bumper and hold left bumper, respectively. So interactions, we're just going to add a hold to that. Hold LB. So right bumper becomes hold right bumper, left bumper becomes hold left bumper. And let's save that. Cool, let's jump to our player input manager here. Let's go over to the bumper inputs. Let's just copy and paste right bumper input and left bumper input. Change it to hold right bumper input and hold left bumper input. You guys know how to do this by now. We've done so many inputs. Let's go down to the on enable, do the same thing, copy it. So what we're checking here is for a performed and a canceled. So under performed, it's going to be change your input status to true. On canceled, it's going to be change your input status to false. So hold RB.performed plus equals I equals greater than hold RB input is equal to true. Likewise, do the same thing for hold LB. And then we're going to copy these and do the same thing, but changed performed to canceled and change the input status from true to false. And that's going to be pretty much it for how they function. Once that is done, we can set up the function that we're going to call on our update functionality. So it's going to check for this every single frame. All right, so that looks good. Cool. Now let's just scroll down here, copy, or put it below rather, handle right bumper input, private void, handle hold right bumper input. And then I'm going to copy and paste this because it's going to be the same thing for the left bumper, changed hold RB to hold LB. What do you want to do? Well, all you want to do is say if hold RB input is true, we want to change our player network manager dot is charging right spell, do we call it? Yes, is charging right spell dot value because RB for right hand to true. Otherwise, change it to false. You don't need to check for owner here because this is only being ran if you are the owner of your player object anyway. So this will update the network variable. And from there, we can create an on-network change functionality that will update the animator's parameters for your game object and your game object in anybody else's game. Okay, so before we do that though, let's go make sure we're calling these functions so it actually gets ran. Go over to your handle all inputs and right below right bumper and left bumper input, or if it makes most sense to you, call handle hold right bumper input and handle hold left bumper input. All right, cool. Save that. Let's jump over to Player Network Manager. Let's go down to our on whatever changed. Let's make two new public voids. On is charging right spell changed, and on is charging left spell changed. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. You're going to need to pass two things here, the old status and the new status of the variable being changed. And then all we're going to simply do is I'm just going to change the name so it matches the variable. We're going to say player.animator.setBool. Make sure you have the name right here. So for me, it's is charging right spell. And we're going to make that the status of whatever is charging right spell is here. All right, cool. Dot value. And then we can copy and paste this and do the exact same thing for is charging left spell. So right becomes left here, and then right becomes left here. And then one last time, right becomes left here. Now we got to call this on network spawn and then unsubscribe from an on network despawn. So let's go over to our player manager. And then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put it right under equipment. Looks like a good spot for me. Make a comment here for spells so it's easy to see where the divide is. It's easy to find these functions when we come back to it a while from now when there are a lot more. Player network manager.on is, oops, not the function itself. Player network manager.is charging right spell on value changed plus equals player network manager.on is charging right spell changed. And then do the same thing for the left. So right becomes left, and then right becomes left. And then copy these two functions here, or these two lines of code rather, and paste them under your on network despawn. But then we're going to unsubscribe, so change the pluses to minuses. All right, cool. Now that should be working. Let's save that now. And let's go back into the project. Let's go to our release. I'm going to call this full release because we're going to do one more thing to make a little bit of polish here. I'll explain in a moment. So we have our full release. Let's go and drop that in here. Now let's go to the full release itself, the actual prefab, and just increase its size here so you can see there's a difference. You can make it dramatic if you want. I'm going to make mine more subtle, so I'm going to go to the particle size, and the start size is 1. I'm going to set it to say 1.3. That looks good. So you can see it. It's definitely noticeable. If you want to make it more egregious, go for it. Let's go to the player combat manager. Let's make a function for successfully charge spell. Now what's this? Let's call it successfully charge spell. It doesn't exist yet. This is a little bit of polish I was talking about, so just bear with me here and I'll explain it when I can show you the animation. So let's make a public virtual void successfully charge spell. You don't need to have this on every single spell, but the ones that you do have it on, it could be pretty cool. So successfully charge spell, and let's override this on the fireball spell. So go over here now and override successfully charge spell. All right, so after we override that, again, bear with me, I'm going to go to the spell item script. I'm going to make a new variable here. We're going to call it spell cast charge effects. And this is going to be the effects that spawn if you've successfully charged the spell and you get to the final volley before throwing it, just to show that, boom, this is fully charged now. And what we're going to do is copy all of this stuff on the initializing, or rather instantiating a spell projectile here. And we're going to change this from our instantiated spell cast release effects to our newly created spellcast charge effects. I'm going to change the name of the local variable to instantiated charge effects, just so we're very clear on what this is. Charge spell effects, cool, yeah, sure, that works. Now we have to also assign this as the new warm-up action and destroy the new saved action. So we're going to destroy all the current action effects before we do this, and then we're going to make this effect the new action effect that we're saving, because this is the most recent used one now. This replaces the warm-up effect. All right, so just like so, cool, looks good, excellent, and change that to that. All right, cool. All right, so what's next? Let's make a comment here. This is not the warm-up effects. We're going to save the charge up effects as a variable, so it can be stored if the player's knocked out the animation. Cool. Now let's go and save that and jump over to the project where I'll show you the animation. See this here? See how the hand goes down right there? Boom. Right when that hand goes down right before you throw it, that's where you want to just boom right there, activate that particle effects. And it just adds a little bit of polish. It's cool. You can play a different sound effect there if you want. It just makes the spell, gives a bit more charm and personality. So right there, paste that animation event wherever you want to instantiate it. If you have a thing like this in your animation, apply that. Now let's go over and drag in this, or duplicate the warm-up effect rather. I'm just going to call it charge effect. And all I'm going to do again is just increase the size just a little bit. So basically when that hand drops, you're going to see the warm-up effect. It's going to be exactly the same, but it's just going to increase in mass. And I think that's just a little bit cooler. So you're just going to see it get a little bit bigger in your hand before you throw it. So say 1.4, sure, that looks good. Let's go over to the fireball spell, drag that in like so, and that should be working as intended. So let's just target this man here, and this is the regular fireball, boom, 150 damage. And now when I do the fully charged fireball, we're going to see a boom, 210 damage. Alright guys, there you go. That is working as intended. So now in the next video, we're going to implement our focus point system, as well as basically update our little UI in the bottom left corner to display a spell icon. And after that, someone suggested we do jumping attacks. So if you guys have any other suggestions, post them down below. And if people want to see the jumping attacks next, I will just go ahead and jump to that. No pun intended. Thank you very much for watching. As always, a special thank you to my patrons. This is because of each and every one of you who get to keep doing this, so you have my sincerest gratitude. I hope you all have a lovely weekend, and I will see you guys next week.